Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll give everyone just a moment to log in and start in just a minute. All right, looks like folks are trickling in. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar on completing the FAFSA, a how-to for adult supporters of foster youth. So before we begin, just a few technical logistics. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website at jbay.org. And we'll also put into the chat the direct link where you can find it on our website. So we'll have that on there, as well as a host of other financial aid materials and resources to support you. And we'll share a little bit more about what some of those resources are as well. As we go through the webinar today, all attendees will be muted, and you can connect to your audio either via your computer or via your phone, but definitely you can submit questions at any time during the webinar through the Q&A function, and we will be able to respond to those questions as we go throughout the webinar today. So my name is Jessica Petros. I'm our Associate Director of Education here at John Burton Advocates for Youth, and I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Potter, our Education Program Manager, also here at JBay. And we also have another financial aid expert on the webinar with us today, Elizabeth Hilton. She is the Director of Student Financial Services at Riverside Community College. In our experience doing these FAFSA webinars, there's a lot of questions that come up for folks throughout the webinar. So we want to be able to respond to you in real time. So Elizabeth will be here with us today to quickly respond to your questions through the Q&A throughout the webinar. And our other colleague, Debbie Rauscher, our Director of Education here at JBay, will also be fielding questions through the Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions at any time throughout the webinar. So what we're going to be covering today is starting off with a little bit of background information about why financial aid matters. Then we're going to dive deep into how to apply for financial aid. We're going to cover the two different types of applications, talk more about what those are, the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. And we'll be walking step by step through the questions of the applications. So a disclaimer now, this webinar is highly technical, lots of details and information. So hope you have your cup of coffee with you. But we'll be going through all those applications so you feel really confident to support a young person with applying for financial aid. And then we're going to talk about some of the key steps after a youth applies for the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application, and then close out with some additional helpful resources that you can use as tools in your toolbox when supporting young people. And as I mentioned, we'll be doing Q&A throughout the webinar, but if there's any other questions that we don't get to answer, we'll have some time at the end for our Q&A as well. So I'm actually just going to turn off my video just to make sure we don't have any internet connectivity issues, but just wanted to say hello, and here we go. So why are we focusing on financial aid? What we've seen is that having some form of post-secondary education really does make a difference. And what we've been looking at with the data is that ever since the Great Recession in 2008, 99% of jobs created since that time, and with the current COVID-19 crisis, have gone to those with at least some college degree. So as you can see on the slide, the dark blue line is jobs that require a bachelor's degree or higher. The orange line is jobs that require an associate's degree or some college. And then the light blue line are jobs that require a high school degree or less. So more and more jobs are being created that require some form of higher education, and there's less and less jobs that require a high school degree. So those jobs are becoming increasingly more competitive. So what we're seeing is that having some form of post-secondary education is going to lead to more job opportunities and really just makes you a more competitive candidate in the job market today. But how do we ensure that our youth not only get to college, but make it through? So what we've seen from the data is that financial aid is one of those key ways that can really make a difference in supporting young people to and through post-secondary education. We've seen from studies that high school seniors that complete the FAFSA are 63% more likely to enroll in higher education. So simply by filling out that application, it's a step forward towards their higher education. And then we see the data shows that those who receive financial aid, it also impacts their success in persisting and transferring and graduating. So students that received at least $7,500 in financial aid, 49% of them transferred or graduated. That's compared to students that received only about $1,000 to $2,000 in financial aid. Only 17% transferred or graduated. So it definitely has a big impact in enrollment and, through graduation as well. There was also a new study that was just released last month through Chapin Hall, their Cal Youth study. They've been tracking the impacts of extended foster care for our youth here in California. And it shows through the study the different characteristics and factors that impacted a youth's ability to enroll in college, but also complete a degree. And what they found is that the estimated odds of completing a degree for those youth were almost 2.4 times higher for youth who received a Chafee ETV grant than for youth who did not. So we're going to talk more about what that Chafee grant is, but essentially it's additional financial aid up to $5,000 just for eligible foster youth. And for those that received that extra financial aid, they were more likely to actually complete college. So the work that you all will be doing to support young people in applying for financial aid, really does make an impact in their success. Given the critical impact of applying and receiving financial aid, we actually launched a challenge, a FAFSA challenge, back in 2017 to, with the goal of increasing financial aid applications for our high school seniors who are in the foster care system. And I wanted to share this with you all in case you're not yet already connected with this initiative. But the way that it works is these efforts are led by each county office of education, specifically through their Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program, also known as FYSCP. And through this initiative, what they've been doing is playing a really key and instrumental role in coordinating and supporting financial aid application completions for these high school seniors, and doing this in collaboration with others. So the key to this success has been them working in close partnership with child welfare and probation and our colleges and our high school districts and all the other potential adults supporting youth through this process. And what we've seen is through these coordinated and dedicated efforts to support our young people, it's been working. So when we started off with the financial aid FAFSA challenge back in 2017, we saw a completion rate of 45% for those filling out the FAFSA and California Dream Act. And then by 2019, 2020, that increased to 64% completion, which I have to note is also higher than the general population. So there was tremendous success with these efforts, and the county folks also have access to data to be able to track in real time our youth that are completing their applications. In 2020 and 21, though, of course, that is when COVID-19 hit. And we saw a decrease in the completion rates, went down to 55% last year. This was actually on par with data that we saw for the general population, both statewide and nationwide. But I think now more than ever, we want to get back and make sure we're supporting our young people to get back on track to a pathway into higher education. And so our goal for this coming year for 2021 and 2022 is a goal of 70%. And I actually just got an email in my inbox about an hour before this webinar showing the latest stats from NCAN that they're already seeing 29% fewer FAFSAs this year than the class of 2021. So I think, this is just a very critical time to continue to support our young people with their financial aid applications. So I know many of you are working with students who are already out of high school, already in college. But for those of you working with our high school seniors, if you're not yet, I highly encourage that you get connected with your local foster youth services coordinating program and to get involved with the FAFSA Challenge efforts. And if you don't know their contact information, we have that information here on the slide. So before we dive into all the key steps in filling out these applications, I wanted to share with you just some general tips for assisting youth through this process. Some lessons learned that we've discovered in the last few years with the success of the FAFSA Challenge. I think, first and foremost, what we've discovered is that it really takes having that high touch, intrusive support to assist our youth through this process. I think especially now with everything being virtual, our youth are just getting bombarded with emails. It's too much information. To really support young people, you can't just send an email. It's got to be, high touch, talking to youth, calling youth, meeting with youth, reminding them, over and over about opportunities to fill out the application, giving them information about what the application is, why to fill it out, why it matters. To really support them appropriately through this process and really meeting youth where they're at and their ability levels. I think different youth are going to come to the table with different skill sets and different experiences. Some might be having a good day, some might be having a bad day, some may have just been removed from their family and placed in a new, resource family. So, keeping in mind the context of the youth and the experiences they might be having at that time to really provide high touch support during this process and recognizing they're going to have different ability levels. I remember even last year we were in a FAFSA workshop and one of our young men was creating a username and didn't understand the difference between uppercase and lowercase. And so we really wanted to make sure to stop and pause and help walk him through that process. And so I think just being flexible and creating enough time in your day to be able to sit down and really help them through this process. We do recommend really doing this work one-on-one. We've found that it's really helpful to young people instead of these kind of larger workshops, that it's really most effective when there's an adult working side by side with a young person, whether that's virtual or in person, to support them throughout the application. And we encourage folks to start the process early to help young people with the application. Some youth might need to start and stop along the way, depending on what might be going on with them that day and things in their life. So just start as early as possible to have all the time you need to really help them through this whole application process. And, with things, with the impact of COVID-19, this assistance can be done in person or virtually. And I think we've seen that success with our partners, depending on what is most appropriate and safe, given, the current state of the world. And what we've seen with people doing support virtually is that you're still able to do that one-on-one, even if in a workshop setting where you can do breakout rooms, where you have an adult paired with a young person doing that one-on-one support, doing screen sharing through platforms like Zoom. So there's definitely ways to be able to meet the youth where they're at, depending on the modality that is best for them. And, lastly, I think use this as an opportunity to talk to youth about their future and their potential. The Cal Youth study that I was mentioning earlier that studied the factors that impacted college degree completion, one of the key findings is that youth reported that for those that received a lot of encouragement to continue their education beyond high school from foster care personnel, like their foster parents or their group home staff or their social workers, those who received a lot of encouragement versus those who just had a little encouragement or no encouragement were much more likely to actually complete college. So I think filling out the FAFSA is really just, or the California Dream Act, is really just the first step. And it's a great opportunity to talk to youth about, all the different college pathways that are out there, from career and technical education to a four-year degree. And just know that some of our youth, they might be scared about going to college. They might be intimidated or overwhelmed because financial aid is super complicated. And so being able to talk to them and give them this information and encourage them and motivate them, I think this is a great opportunity to have that conversation if it hasn't yet happened, or to continue to have that conversation. And I think also for some of our youth, they have not maybe liked high school. School is not for them. And this is another opportunity, talking about a way to get some money for college, to educate them about the differences between college and high school and the opportunities available to them, so we can get them into a fulfilling career path with a living wage. So just wanted to share some of those things to keep in mind as you're supporting young people with the application. So now we're going to dive into how to apply for financial aid. There's going to be a lot of details we're going to cover, and I just wanted to flag for you, we put into the chat the link to our website that has all of our financial aid guides and tools. And so we do have these visual guides where we take screenshots of every questions on the two different types of applications with detailed information on how to answer the questions. So if you're trying to take notes and you miss something, I just want to remind folks that you'll have these other tools to reference, and we'll have the webinar recorded as well if you need to access it at another later time. All right. So when we think about financial aid, we like to really think about it as a three-step process. The first step being filling out either the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act. And again, we'll talk more about those two applications. And depending on the youth, that could take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And then the next step is completing this additional application for the Chafee grant, which is pretty quick and takes about 10 minutes. And we actually recommend that when you're working with a young person, you fill out both of those applications at the same time. And then the third step is creating a web grants account. So in our webinar today, we're going to talk about all these three key steps, but just for you all, if you're trying to think about how to schedule and manage your time, you probably do want about an hour set aside to assist you through the application. Okay, so there are two main applications. One is the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. And this is for students who are US citizens or other permanent residents or eligible non-citizens. That's usually somebody who has a green card or a permanent resident card. They'd have an alien registration number. And on the FAFSA, there's even a more detailed list of different other categories that someone might fall in terms of eligible non-citizen. The other application is the California DREAM Act application, also referred to as the CADA, and that is for students that meet certain criteria to count as an eligible undocumented immigrant. And to note, the FAFSA, that entitles you as an application, you're applying for both federal financial aid, that might be like the Pell Grant or work study, as well as state financial aid, like the Cal Grant. Whereas the California DREAM Act application is an application just for eligible students who are applying for state financial aid. So we're gonna share some more differences between these applications. So let's start with the FAFSA. If someone's applying for the FAFSA, they have a few different options in terms of where they can fill it out. They can fill it out on the website listed on the screen. It's actually available in either English or Spanish. The other option the student would have is to fill it out on an app on their phone, the My Student Aid app. So actually, the student can start and stop it on either one. They could start on a browser, finish it on their app. It asks the same questions. It's just sort of a different layout and feel. So today we're going to go through and provide screenshots of what it looks like if you're filling it out on the browser, but just know, the app might look and feel a little different, but it's the same questions. They can also fill it out with a paper application, and I have that information on the slide, but we definitely recommend that students fill it out online to reduce any chances of error. Now, for those filling out the California DREAM Act application, it's a little different. They can also fill it out online, but the online application, for some reason, is only available in English. Paper applications are also available for the California DREAM Act application in either English or Spanish. And so they can either download it from the website or call the number listed to get the paper application as well. And again, we recommend that they fill it out online if English is their preferred language. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about the California DREAM Act application, just so you understand, what it is and who's eligible. So as I mentioned before, this is the application for state financial aid. It also allows applicants who are eligible and meet the criteria to be able to pay in-state resident fees at California public colleges instead of the more costly out-of-state resident fees. And again, if they're filling out this application, they're not going to be eligible for federal financial aid. So who's eligible to submit a CADA? And I apologize, I know a lot of words on the screen. It's a little complicated, I think, even for our students. But there's a few different criteria. Someone can either have temporary protected status. That's less common. That's like if our government designates a country for TPS because there's a current civil war in this country or environmental disaster like an earthquake or some other kind of temporary condition, someone might be granted temporary protected status. Or someone might also be able to qualify if they have a U visa. That's also not that common. That's if someone was a victim of a crime and they suffered mental or physical abuse and they're helping the government investigate this criminal activity. So those are two scenarios, not that common, but the more typical criteria that you'll see that our students are usually falling under is what's called AB 540 criteria. And that's what's listed on the slide here. To qualify for AB 540, they have to either have 3 or more years of full-time attendance or equivalent from a California high school, adult school, or community college, or any kind of combination of the 3, or 3 or more years of full-time high school coursework, and they attended some kind of combo of elementary school, middle school, or high school in California for a combined total of 3 or more years. In addition, they have to either graduate from a California high school, get a GED or HiSET, or get an associate's degree from a California community college, or fulfill the minimum transfer requirements from a community college to transfer to either our University of California schools or our Cal State universities. And then essentially to be eligible, they have to say that they're going to be registering or enrolling in an accredited California college or university. There's other kinds of visas out there that don't qualify, like if someone has a student visa or a tourist visa, and there's a long list of those different visas listed on the application that don't qualify, just so you're aware of that as well. Now, this criteria is all listed within the application as well. So when someone's filling out the application, they're first asked these questions to confirm if they meet this eligibility. So if a student can't quite remember all this criteria, it will be listed on the application for them before they proceed. A few other tips with the California DREAM Act, because it can be confusing for students to determine if they're eligible. So you may have heard of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA is not a requirement to fill out the California DREAM Act application. It's okay if they have DACA status, but they don't need DACA status. I think where a lot of students get confused is sometimes when someone has DACA status, they may have been issued a Social Security number. But even if they have a Social Security number issued through DACA, they still need to fill out the California DREAM Act application. It might say on the card something like valid for work only with DHS authorization. And in that case, they would not fill out the FAFSA, they would still fill out the CADA. Just so you know, too, a parent's citizenship status doesn't impact their eligibility. So it doesn't matter if a student's parent is a citizen or not. That's irrelevant. They're really looking at the student's citizenship status. And then lastly, just to remind students, I think a lot of them are nervous to self-disclose if they are undocumented. And you can just reassure students that the information filled out on the California DREAM Act, it's not shared with the federal government. This is a state application, and it's managed through the California Student Aid Commission, and they, protect the confidentiality of the student records. There's never been any scenarios of them sharing information in the past about their immigration status. And they also comply with FERPA, which essentially, protects the students' educational records. So this information is private and confidential. A special note for our foster youth that might be applying for California DREAM Act application is Special Immigration Juvenile Status, SIJS. So foster youth who are undocumented, they might be able to qualify for SIJS. And what this is that certain undocumented children that are a dependent of the court through juvenile court, and the court says that they can't be reunified with one or both of their parents because of abuse or abandonment or neglect, and that it's also not in the best interest of the young person to return to their country of nationality, they might be able to apply for SIJS. And essentially what this is an opportunity for them to apply to become a lawful permanent resident, also known as getting their green card. For students that have applied, the truth is that sometimes these applications, they might apply, but it might take years before they get approved. So let students know that even if they have applied and they have a pending application, they still have to submit the California DREAM Act application. They're not eligible for federal financial aid. Also to note, if you're working with a student who has not yet applied for SIJS, we recommend that they reach out to their child welfare agency just to explore if that might be a good fit for them, because ideally we'd want them to, if they are interested in applying and eligible, to initiate that application before they turn 18. So just something to keep in mind for any of you working with foster youth who are also undocumented immigrants. Great. So after the students have completed either the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application, I wanted to give you just a little bit of an overview to understand what that application is actually doing and how it works. So the two applications, they both ask a series of questions to determine a student's expected family contribution, also known as EFC. And EFC is really stating how much the student is able to contribute to the cost of attendance. And for most of our foster youth, when they fill out the application, the EFC is going to be 0. And that's not a bad thing. So the colleges and universities, what they do is they look at their cost of attendance. That's the total amount it costs to attend college. So tuition, housing, books, supply. Then they subtract the student's EFC from that cost of attendance to determine their eligibility for need-based aid. So that can be things like the Cal Grant, the Pell Grant, the Chafee Grant. Those are need-based aids based on their income. Just wanted to note that because, there's other types of scholarships out there that maybe are for students that are athletes or have done great community service. This is really applications for need-based aid based on their income and the size of their family. So now you know the two applications. When do you apply? So the priority application is between October 1st to March 2nd, before the start of the school year that you plan to attend. So for those of you working with students right now, they would be filling out the application between October 1st, 2021 and March 2nd, 2022, if they're planning on attending school next fall, 2022. This is the priority application period. Students can apply after that deadline, but in order to qualify for the maximum aid possible, we do encourage that they fill it out by March 2nd. As an update, students attending California community colleges actually have until September 2nd now to apply. Before, that used to be just for our foster youth, but now that's been expanded to all students planning on attending a California community college have until September 2nd. So they do have some extra time if they need it. Some colleges, primarily like the 4 years or colleges or universities might have earlier priority deadlines. So definitely advise students to check that out in case that might be the scenario for their college. And also let students know they can apply before they even submit college applications. So it's okay if they don't know yet where they want to go, they haven't been accepted yet, or even, started the application process, they can still apply. And again, we encourage they start that application as soon as possible. So what should they bring to fill out the application? Here's a list of a few items you want to advise students to have ready to help expedite the process when they start the application. So first, they can bring their email address. They are going to need that to fill out the applications. We really recommend that they don't use their high school emails. A lot of those expire and they're time limited. So this is a great opportunity if they haven't yet to create like a Gmail or something that's longer term that they can use throughout their time in college. They're also going to want to have a list of which colleges they want to apply to. This can be up to 10 colleges, but it also, can just be at minimum 1. And they can always update this and change this if they need to. We'll talk more about that. And then for those filling out the FAFSA, they will need their social security number or their alien registration number. And it's really important that they also know their name as it's listed on their social security card. So make sure that they've checked that out, because some students might go by a different name and not actually know what's on their social security card. And that's going to be important to make sure that there's no errors with their application. Now, for students filling out the California DREAM Act application, they will be asked to enter a statewide student identifier, also known as an SSID. This is optional, but this is a number that for students attending like a high school, public high school in California would get assigned to them. And if they don't know this number, they can reach out to their high school or their counselor to find this number out. It's recommended. It helps the student's application get matched to their high school GPA, but it's not required if they don't know it. They'll also be asked to enter their ITIN, their individual taxpayer identification number. This is also optional. This an ITIN, if you're not familiar, this would be like if an undocumented immigrant needed to file a federal income tax return, they would have this number. But again, if they don't have it, it's okay. Some students probably didn't make enough money to have to file taxes, so it is optional. And then lastly, they're going to need to know their tax or income information from the prior year. So for students applying now who are planning to attend in school in 2022, 2023, they'll be asked information about their financials from 2020. So if they file taxes in 2020, they'll want to have their tax income information. Maybe they didn't make enough to have to file taxes, but they worked. So they'd want to know and look at their W-2s. And then for those filling out the California DREAM Act application, they might be asked about their current assets, like how much money is in their checking or their savings. So just have students come prepared about any income they earned or received in 2020, and just kind of being aware of any current assets they have as well. So let's get started. What we're going to do is we are going to now walk through step by step the actual FAFSA application. And I do want to note that the questions on the California DREAM Act are very similar. So as we go through the FAFSA, we will pause at certain points to note, some key differences with the California DREAM Act application, but otherwise we'll just be showing the questions as they look on the FAFSA application. All right. So, to fill out the FAFSA, as we mentioned, you go to fafsa.ed.gov. This is a screenshot of the homepage. The FAFSA has to, and same with the California DREAM Act, it has to be filled out every year. So if they're new, they're doing it for the first time, they click Start Here. If they're a returning user, they would click Login, and it would actually allow them to pre-fill some of the current year's FAFSA with some data from last year's FAFSA. Then they'll come to this screen, and for those of you who have done the FAFSA before, this screen is a little bit of a different layout, but similar content. But they choose which option to start to fill out the application. And for our youth, they're going to select the option that says, I am a student and want to access the FAFSA form. And so they click that box, and then they get these options. So this is new this year. They have the option to either create what's called an FSA ID or use personal identifiers. Now, we highly recommend that students click the option to create an FSA ID. Essentially, they're going to use that to be able to sign their application once they're finished with it at the end. If they don't create an FSA ID, they can use personal identifiers like their name, date of birth, and social, but they're still going to have to enter their FSID at the end of the FAFSA. And if they don't, then they have to print the application, sign it, scan it, send it in, a paper signature. So it's a lot more work, and we definitely recommend, again, that they create that FSA ID to get their application going. And once they click the button to create one, it actually takes them to a new website to go through a process to answer a series of questions to get that created. So you'd come to the screen, you'd want to click Create an Account to create that FSA ID, which stands for the Federal Student Aid Identification. So as I mentioned, it brings them to a separate website, and this is a screenshot of what that looks like, and they can, get started to create that ID. They'll enter their name, their date of birth, and their social security number. Now, they only enter it once, so make sure they enter it very slowly, very carefully, and they want to enter both their name and their number exactly as it appears on their social security card. So that's just an important tip for youth. And if they don't know their social security number, they can definitely contact their county's child welfare department or even their county's independent living program, ILP, for assistance. So then they have to create a username and a password, enter an email address, again, recommending that they don't use their high school email address. And definitely advise students too to check their spam and junk. A lot of times these emails will go to their spam folder and they might miss it. So they want to get in the habit of looking there as well. Here they have to enter a permanent address. I will note that the mailing address in this step of the process is optional. They will have to enter it later on, but they do have to either provide a verified email address or mobile phone number. It's really up to them. They can do one or both. And then they'll be asked if they want to set up mobile phone account recovery, like if they get locked out, and that's definitely helpful in case they forget their password. Then they'll just be asked how they'd like to be communicated with, whether it's email or postal mail. Again, we recommend email, and they do send a lot of important communications to students via email. So they'll want to get in the habit of checking that weekly, I would say. And then lastly, they answer challenge questions just in case they forget their password and get locked out. I'd say for some youth, sometimes this could be maybe triggering if they're being asked, hey, what's your mother's maiden name, or questions about their childhood. So this could be another opportunity to really just provide additional support to youth through the challenge question section. And after that, they just review all the information, make sure it's correct, and then they'll have to verify either the email address or the mobile phone number that they put in. If they do put in both, they will have to verify both. So, if they put in an email, they'll get a code sent to their email or a text sent to their phone to verify that. But once those are all verified, then their FSA ID is created. And it actually is created within minutes. So once it's created and processed, they can continue to fill out their FAFSA application. But as you just noticed, the student just had to create a lot of different things. They had to create a username and a password. They may have just opened up a new email address, which also has a password, and challenge questions and answers. So that's a lot to keep track of. So I would definitely pause with your students at this point and work with them on a system to help them write all this information down and keep it somewhere safe so that they don't forget. A lot of times youth might forget some of these key things, and it can be a challenge to get back into their account. So I wanted to pause here to also share with you a few differences between the FAFSA and the California DREAM Act at this point. So the CADA, it doesn't have an FSA ID. What their process looks like is the student gets asked a series of questions to confirm their eligibility, essentially making sure they meet the AB 540 criteria or the other criteria we discussed. And then if they say, yes, I meet this criteria, then they're prompted to create a username and a password. They'll also additionally have to confirm their email address as well. And similarly, they'll also be creating challenge questions. So it's pretty similar, but there are some differences with that process. All right, so once they create their FSA ID, they can go back to the main FAFSA page and log in. They can either log in with their username or either that verified email or mobile phone number that they just set up. They'll enter their password and then they can log in and get started. A disclaimer will pop up, just giving them some information. They can click accept and move on. And then they have to select the application that they're applying for. This is one where I think students can get confused. So I was going to ask them, do you want to start the 2022-23 FAFSA or the 2021-22? So they want to select the school year for the year that they're planning on attending college, not the current year, but the year that they plan to attend college. For students who are thinking about summer school, it's a little more complicated. Colleges actually have the option of either using the prior year or the upcoming year financial aid for summer. So each college does a little bit different. So what we recommend is that if you are working with a student who's thinking about summer school, that they apply with both applications. They do the current year and the upcoming year, and then they can work with their college at that time to, figure out how they process summer financial aid. So once they've selected the application year, in this case for students who are planning attending next year, that'd be the 2022-23 FAFSA form, they're prompted to create a save key. Essentially, when someone starts the FAFSA, they can start it and stop it and save it and finish it later. And they can actually return within 45 days to complete and submit the FAFSA. To do this, they make students, though, create a save key, which is another password to be able to come in and finish their application. So we would add this to the list of items that you want to work with students to remember to, write down and keep somewhere safe so that they don't forget. So once they've done that, there's just a general introduction page, gives them some information about all the different sections on the FAFSA and how to fill it out. So they can just click continue. And then you'll see on this screen, there's actually 7 sections within the FAFSA. And so the students will go question by question and fill out the different questions. If they don't understand a question, there's a little question mark icon that they can click on to get more information. And there's also this new feature, this little green owl icon in the bottom right corner that can provide virtual assistance. It's like a live chat bot. And I think it's very helpful. So if students get stuck on something, you can also chat for virtual assistance. And they can click save at the top of the form if they need to stop at any time as well. So the first section is student demographics. So their social security number is going to preload from their FSA ID, but then the rest of the questions they will fill in. And again, they want to make sure they enter their name exactly as it appears on their social security card, and then enter their date of birth again. Now on the CADA, they actually do have a question that asks for their social, because as you remember, students who receive DACA may have been issued a temporary social. So they can enter that if they have it, it's optional. But on the CADA, they'll also be asked the optional question of their ITIN number. Otherwise, the questions are the same. They'll then be asked to enter their email and their phone. The email is not mandatory, but it's definitely recommended. Telephone number, it's also an optional field. Here's where they enter their permanent mailing address. This should be similar to their address that they use on any, official government documents like tax returns. It could be a PO box somewhere where they get mail. And if they don't have a permanent mailing address, they can talk to their college financial aid administrator. They can often help and work with them to set up a place to get mail as well. This is questions about state residency and eligibility. They ask if they've lived in California for at least 5 years. And this is a screening question that explores if they might be eligible for California student financial aid, also known as the Cal Grant. And just to note, there's no separate application required for the Cal Grant application. So, filling out this FAFSA, it's just one application to explore eligibility for either state or federal financial aid. We'll talk more though later on in this webinar, but there are minimum GPA requirements for a lot of the Cal Grants. And so the student will need to ensure that their high school submits their GPA or their college, if they're already in college, to be eligible for this. And we'll talk more about how that process works. But the next question is just asking if they're a US citizen. And if they are an eligible non-citizen, this is where they would enter that alien registration number. This is the student education section. So it starts off by asking them what their high school completion status will be when they begin college. It could be a high school diploma or a GED. Both of those options are fine. And then it's going to ask what their college degree or certificate will be that they're going to be working on once they're in college. So this is where you'd want to advise students to pick the option that best fits their initial educational goal. So what goal or certificate or degree do they plan on working on? Don't have them select other and undecided. Have them select something because it can help them qualify for more financial aid. And if they're not sure what they want to do, if it's a 2-year or a 4-year degree, have them select 4-year college. They'll also be asked what their college grade level will be when they start the school year. So for a lot of your youth, like your high school students, they'll be selecting never attended college, or it'll be their first year. One area that some students get confused on is a lot of our high school students now might be taking dual enrollment courses. These are courses where a student is in high school, but they're also taking college level courses. And sometimes these college classes are actually hosted at a local community college or even offered on their high school campus. And even if a high school student was in dual enrollment while they're in high school, you can let them know they're still considered never attended college / first year. Also to note, it's going to ask if they are interested in work study, and we advise students to select yes. A lot of students, in my experience, have no idea what work study is, so you might want to actually stop here to educate them that federal work study allows students who have financial need to be able to actually earn a portion of their financial aid award by part-time employment, either on or off campus. And so it is competitive. If they select yes, it doesn't guarantee that they will receive it. But it might allow them to be eligible to receive it. And if they decide later on that they don't want to do it, they can always say no. But we do, recommend that at least select yes for now to express interest. The next question is the student selective service section. And there's some really actually big updates to this section for those of you that have been involved in the FAFSA in prior years. So first it asks, are you a male or female? And this is asking about their sex as indicated on their birth certificate. The reason it asks is because historically, male students were required to register with the Selective Service in order to be eligible for federal aid or state aid. Recent legislation just passed, and Selective Service is no longer required to qualify for state or federal financial aid. But because this is brand new, these questions are still on the FAFSA. So for your male students, definitely advise them that they don't have to they don't have to register with the Selective Service. So if they do select no, it's okay. It won't impact their eligibility for federal or state aid. Even on the California DREAM Act, it does ask if they're male or female. And similarly, they're no longer required to register with the Selective Service for the California DREAM Act as well. So the next question is just about if they have a driver's license. It's definitely optional. It doesn't impact their eligibility in any way. If they want, they can enter that information there, but it's not required. And then on this slide, they actually get asked if they are a foster youth or if they were in the foster care system at any time. So we advise youth to answer yes to this question, even if they were involved in the foster care system for just one day. So it doesn't guarantee any benefits or resources, but what happens a lot of times is a lot of colleges will look at their applications to see which youth indicated that they were ever in the foster care system. And most of our public colleges and universities in California have really robust foster youth support programs. And so a lot of these programs might look to see who indicated yes on this question to provide additional information to them about resources and programs and services at their campus. So it might just be a way for a student to get connected to additional resources and supports at their college. This question is not on the California DREAM Act application though, just on the FAFSA. And then they're asked about the highest school completed by their parents. And, just let students know if they don't know or they don't want to enter it, it's totally fine. They can enter other or unknown, and it doesn't impact their eligibility for federal student aid. They're not referring to their legal guardians or their foster parents, so you can advise students about that as well. Next, there's these student eligibility worksheet questions. These are only on the FAFSA, and there's actually been some big changes to this section as well. So it's going to ask if the student has ever received federal student aid. So for some of you working with returning students, they may have received financial aid in the past. And if they have received federal financial aid, then they're asked additional questions. They are asked if they were ever convicted of the possession or sale of illegal drugs for an offense that occurred while receiving federal student aid. So some really good news, just like with the Selective Service. In the past, if students were convicted of these types of drug-related crimes while receiving federal student aid, they were no longer eligible to receive federal student aid. But this is no longer the case. So these questions, unfortunately, are still on the FAFSA. They haven't yet taken them off, but they no longer impact your eligibility for federal student aid. So it's okay if they were convicted of that type of offense while receiving financial aid. If they were convicted and they answer yes, they're asked additional questions, and I'll show you on the next slide as well. Then they're asked even more questions. But again, it no longer impacts their eligibility. And I know it's hard to see, but there's this little blue text box on the screen that actually lets the student know that it doesn't impact their eligibility as well. So that's definitely some good news for our students. And this just isn't a factor for the California DREAM Act as well. Okay, so the next section is school selection. So depending on how they answered their other questions, if they indicated that they're going to be graduating with from high school, they're going to be asked to add their high school. If they indicated that they are receiving a GED, then this question does not show up. But if they did say they're going to be getting their high school diploma, they're asked to enter their high school, and they can use the search function to find and select their school. Definitely recommend that they use the search function so that they don't type in any errors when entering their high school information. So as you can see, they can put in their information and then select the correct high school. They really want to make sure they selectly correct the one for the city they live in. And then they select continue. Then they'll just confirm that this really is the correct high school. And if this all looks good, then they can move on to the next section. Here is where they add the colleges that they plan to attend. So they only have to add at least one, but they can actually add up to 10 colleges. And again, it's okay if they haven't applied there yet, or if they're not sure if they're admitted. They can enter the ones that they're hoping to apply to or attend. And they can change this later. So plans change, a lot of our youth move around. And so they could always go back into the application after it's been processed to make any changes if they need to. Also to note too, that maybe they want to apply to more than 10 colleges. So they can put in 10 colleges, submit their application, wait till it's processed. They'll either get a student aid report or a CAL student aid report from the California Dream Act. And then they can go back in, remove those colleges, and add a new batch of 10. And they can do that as many times as they want. So after they, search for their college, they select the one that they're interested in applying to. Then for each college that they add, they'll also be asked about their housing plans for that college. So the options are you planning on living on campus, with a parent, or off campus? Now, I would recommend for our students, if they are living with a foster parent, a resource parent, a relative caregiver, or even a legal guardian, don't have them select with parent. Have them select off campus. They'll be able to qualify for more financial aid. Lastly, there's this little function to order the schools. In California, it doesn't matter which order you list your schools, so they don't have to worry about that. And then you'll see they'll add more schools button. If they want to add additional colleges, they can do that up to 10. So this is what I already mentioned. If they want, they can, after their application has been processed, take out the 10 colleges they listed and replace it with an additional 10 colleges if they're interested. And all those colleges that they enter, both the original set and the new set, will still receive their FAFSA information. All right, moving along to the dependency status section. This is a very important section for our foster youth. So the dependency determination section asks a series of questions to determine which students might be considered independent on the FAFSA or the California Dream Act. And if they are considered independent, they do not need to provide information about parents. So if they are independent, then the financial aid information that they ask about, it's only going to look at the student's income or their spouse if they're married, and it's not going to look at their parents' financial information. There's many ways that someone might qualify to be independent, and one of them is by age. So for our students who are 24 years or older, as of January 1st of the year that they're applying to college, they'll be considered automatically independent, and they actually won't be asked any questions in this section. So for example, if someone's planning on attending college next fall, if they're going to be 24 or older as of January 1st, then they'll be automatically considered independent. So as I mentioned, there's a series of questions. The first one is asking about marital status. And if someone is married, then they are considered independent. And again, they won't have to fill out the parent section. Single doesn't, they're not referring to someone with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but they are asking about their married status. Next, they're going to ask if the student has dependents. So if they have any children, this is another way that someone might be considered independent on the FAFSA. And if so, they will automatically be skipped additional questions about other potential criteria. Now, this screen only appears if someone indicates that they have children or if they're married. So if they are married or have children, it'll show their total household size. And that's not referring to siblings or any other relatives or foster parents. It's really just looking at their spouse or children. And then it's going to ask, of those people in your household size, how many of you are in college? So for most of our youth, they would be entering one for themselves, that they're planning on going to college, unless they have a spouse that's going to be attending college or any children who will be attending college at least half-time. But for students who are not married, they don't have children, there's additional questions that pop up to determine if they might be considered independent. And if they select any of these, they only have to select one. Again, they can qualify for independent status. It asks if they're in the military, if they're a veteran. But there are two questions that pertain to many of our youth involved in the foster care system. So this is really important that they know these questions and know how to answer them correctly, because they might be eligible again to skip parental financial information. One of the questions is, at any time since you turned age 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care? Or were you a dependent or ward of the court? The other potential question that might apply to some of the youth that you're working with is, does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your state of legal residence? So before we move on, I just want to provide a little bit more information about that first question, if they've ever been a dependent or ward of the court after the age of 13, because that one can be a little complicated. So just to clarify, even if they were a dependent or ward of the court for just one day after the age of 13, they qualify. So maybe they were a dependent or ward of the court up until the age of 14, and then they were reunified with their parents or adopted. They're still eligible, and they wouldn't have to provide the financial information for their parents. Just to clarify too, someone can be involved in the child welfare system and not be considered a dependent or ward of the court. So they might even have a social worker, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were a dependent or ward of the court. What they're really referring to is youth who were in out-of-home care. The guidance provided to financial aid administrators from the federal government, clearly states that if you were a dependent or ward of the court, but remained in the legal custody of your parents, then you don't qualify. They're really talking about youth who were removed from their parents, where their parents were no longer in legal custody of them. So that can be a little confusing. And if you're not sure, definitely reach out to your child welfare agency or CDSS, the California Department of Social Services, and I'll provide some more information on the next slide. But also to clarify too, some of our foster youth, also known as crossover youth, might also be under the jurisdiction of their juvenile justice probation department. So just so you know too, some of our foster youth who are eligible are being served by child welfare and others by probation. And those served by probation are also eligible for independent status on the FAFSA. There are some unique scenarios where someone maybe exited foster care before the age of 13 and they were reunified with their parents or adopted. There might be a scenario under a special circumstance where maybe it was a failed adoption and the youth ultimately was kicked out, is homeless, and the parents are no longer taking care of them. You can talk to the financial aid office at the college that you plan to attend, and they might be able to make an exemption for you for special circumstances. But except under those very rare scenarios, for anyone whose case closed before the age of 13, they would not be eligible for independent status on the FAFSA. For many of our youth that do qualify, do check off the box, they might be flagged for verification to prove that they were a dependent or ward of the court. And if they are, there's paperwork that the court can create to verify their status. Now, historically, youth would need to get this word of the court letter and submit it to their college or university. There was a new bill that passed that actually allows college financial aid offices to automatically verify this status through a data match with CDSS. The truth is, though, it doesn't always happen. Not all financial aid officers are using this new tool, even though it exists. So just to be prepared, many of your youth might still get flagged for verification and asked to provide this letter, or maybe there was an unsuccessful match in the system. So if they are asked to provide the letter, they definitely need to get it. And it's a very simple letter. It doesn't provide any details about, why they were involved in the system. It's not a minute order. It really just says this is when their case opened and closed. And to get that letter, they would contact their either their county social worker or independent living program if they're a current foster youth, or they would contact the state foster care ombudsman's office if they're a former foster youth. And I have that number listed on the slide. So again, if you're not totally sure if your student qualifies, you can always call the state foster care ombudsman's office as well. All right. And then lastly, if they did answer yes to any of those questions, they would qualify for independent student status, and this screen would pop up. And then they're asked this optional question if they'd like to answer questions about their parents. They don't have to. They can totally select no, and it doesn't impact their financial aid in any way. So I would definitely advise to students just to select no if this comes up. And then if they do qualify for independent student status, as we mentioned, it skips the financial sections about parents and goes straight to asking them questions about their financial situation. Now, the questions on the California DREAM Act in this section are pretty much all the same. There is one different question. And at the end of the dependency section on the California DREAM Act, it asks an additional question if they are eligible and meet the criteria for the Chafee grant. So we'll talk more about that, but the Chafee grant is, again, additional financial aid for eligible foster youth, up to $5,000 if they were a dependent or ward of the court at any time between the ages of 16 and 18. So it does ask them that on the California DREAM Act, but it does not ask them that on the FAFSA. So with that, we now turn to the student financial section, and I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So I'm going to take us through the student financial section of the FAFSA. A lot of the questions are very similar to what will appear on the CADA. I will talk about some of the distinctions at the end. But I wanted to share with folks that for many applicants, the most difficult part about filling out the FAFSA or the CADA form is entering the financial information. So in this section, I'm going to walk through the student financial sections on the FAFSA and then the 3 options that students can select regarding their income tax information. As a reminder, this section will be asking questions about the prior year. So for students that are completing the 2022-2023 FAFSA that became available on October 1st, the income tax questions will pertain to 2020. All answers for the questions related to assets, as Jessica mentioned, should be based on the date that the FAFSA form is filed, like bank account balances as an example. And also in this section, just as another reminder, we're walking through this as if the student qualifies for independent status. So all of the questions pertaining to financials are asking about the student's financials, not their parents' information. All right, so the first question asks if the student completed their IRS income tax return for the appropriate year. From this screen, they must select one of the three options presented, which is already filed, will file, or not going to file. So I'm going to start with the first options the first option that students can select, which is already filed or already completed. Next slide, please, Jessica. Again, this is the option they would select if they already filed their 2020 tax return. Next slide. So they will see the option, if they select already filed or already completed, they will see the option to link to the IRS, where they can automatically pull their tax return information from the IRS website using what's called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. So it is highly, highly recommended that students link to the IRS and that they use the data retrieval tool. Otherwise, they will have to manually enter all of the information that is on their tax return. We know that this increases the likelihood that errors may be made. So again, we encourage you to encourage students to utilize that IRS DRT. To protect the security of the tax information, they will not actually be able to see the information that is being transmitted. And I'll show some examples of what they will see in a few slides. If for whatever reason they choose to enter their tax return information manually and they don't have a copy of their return, they can download a free transcript from the IRS website. We have the link listed there on the screen, irs.gov/transcript. Next slide, please. So the screenshot here shows the message that appears if the student clicked on skip IRS DRT and complete manually. So that was an option on the prior screen. So the message encourages them to use the IRS DRT and then warns that they may have to provide additional IRS documentation later on if they choose to input the information manually. It then gives them one more opportunity to opt into utilizing the tool. If the student selects no thanks for using the IRS data retrieval tool, then they will be asked to manually respond to questions about income and tax information from their federal tax income return. Next slide. So after they click the proceed to the IRS button, if they choose to use that IRS DRT tool, this screen will pop up informing them that they are leaving the FAFSA website. The message also informs them that the FAFSA form will automatically open once they are finished transferring their information from the IRS. They can simply just click proceed to the IRS again, and they will be taken to the next screen. Next slide, please. Perfect. So after they click proceed to the IRS, a warning message will pop up just indicating that the IRS data retrieval tool is for authorized use only, and they can just click OK to proceed. So this is a screenshot of the IRS data retrieval tool. Most of the information on the screen will actually auto-populate from the information that they already entered into the FAFSA. If they need to make any changes, they can edit their first and last name, their date of birth, and their filing status. The social security number cannot be edited. Important to note here is that the student will need to input their address, and that the address that they input should be entered as the exact same address that they reported on their 2020 income tax return. So this is how the IRS DRT looks up their information in the system. So once they enter that address, they can click submit. Next slide. So next, they will see a screen giving them the option to transfer their information now, or if for some reason they no longer want to use the IRS data retrieval tool, they can click do not transfer my information. Once they select transfer now, they will be taken back to the main FAFSA application where they left off. They are again notified on this page that the detailed tax return information that is transmitted from the IRS will not display on the IRS page or on their FAFSA application. Next slide. So after the data has been transmitted, instead of showing exact numbers, it'll show as transferred from the IRS in each field. So it's important to note that the information will be preloaded And like I said, it won't show exact numbers for privacy or security reasons. This also means that the information that was transmitted cannot be edited or changed. So if the student did not use the IRS DRT and they will be inputting the information manually, the FAFSA will tell them where to find the requested information on their tax return. Next slide. So most of the student financials questions are pretty straightforward. However, here on the student income from work question, they will need to indicate if they filed what's called an IRS Schedule K-1. So this only applies to individuals in a legal business partnership, so they should select no and hit continue. Again, if they utilize the IRS DRT, the field will show as transferred from the IRS. If they have chosen to input the information manually, they can click the question mark to the right of the text box to view the instructions on where to find the requested information on their tax return. So next, they will be asked a series of questions to determine if they need to provide additional information about their assets. So the FAFSA has a series of questions as part of what's called a student simplified path determination. This screens to see if they are eligible to skip questions related to assets and then take what is called the simplified path. So in this section, they may be asked if they filed a Schedule 1 with their taxes, which is a form used to report certain types of income, such as unemployment benefits and self-employment income. This also includes gig work, such as Uber driving. There's also other certain types of less common deductions or income that they might have filed on that Schedule 1 that's listed here on the screen. If they use the IRS data retrieval tool, this question may show as transferred from the IRS. Please note too that even if they did file a Schedule 1, they can still answer no if the only income type reported on the Schedule 1 was unemployment benefits or other less common types of income that is noted on the screen. If they did file a Schedule 1 or think that they may have, they can select yes or don't know. They will then be asked additional questions to determine if they qualify for the simplified path. The first question asks if they are currently a dislocated worker. So they should answer yes if they were laid off or if they are receiving unemployment benefits, and if they're unlikely to return to their previous occupation. They can also select yes to being a dislocated worker if they lost self-employment income because of the COVID-19 pandemic. If they answer no or don't know as to whether or not they are a dislocated worker, they will be asked the questions on the next screen. So here on the next slide, this question asks if the student receives certain types of government benefits. So the names listed on the application refer to the federal programs. In California, we've rebranded them a bit. So Medicaid is Medi-Cal, SNAP is CalFresh, which we kind of also refer to as food stamps. And temporary assistance for needy families is CalWorks. So on this screen, students should select all of the benefits that they've received in 2020 or 2021. If they did not receive any of these benefits, they should just select none of the above. They will then be asked questions about their assets, such as money and checking and savings accounts on a later screen. As a reminder, the questions about assets, which we will be covering in a bit, are based on the date the FAFSA form is filled out. So next slide. So after qualifying for this simplified path or answering questions about their assets, the student will be asked to provide the amount of their income tax for 2020. Again, if they used the IRS data retrieval tool, the field will show as transferred from the IRS. If they are entering the information manually, they should refer to the italicized instructions above the text box to locate the information on their tax form. On the next slide, so here, if the student indicated that they filed taxes, So regardless of whether they imported the data from the IRS DRT or entered it manually, they will be asked about various types of income that they may have included in the income reported on their tax return. So if they received college grants, scholarships, or any payments from AmeriCorps in 2020 that they also included in the income reported on their taxes, they must enter the amount here to ensure that those amounts do not count against their financial aid eligibility. If they use the IRS DRT, some of the questions will actually show as transferred from the IRS. Next slide. Here they will be asked a series of questions about whether or not they paid child support or had earnings from a cooperative education program offered by a college. A cooperative education program is a college program that offers students funding so they can have a paid experience through a college course that's related to their academic or career goals. They'll also be asked if they received federal work study. So they must enter this information twice in the FAFSA so that it's subtracted when determining their total income. The amount should have first been included in the total provided when asked how much did you earn from working, which we saw a few slides ago earlier on in the student financial section. They should also then provide the amount here where it asks for taxable earnings from need-based employment programs, such as federal work study and need-based employment portions of fellowships and assistantships. And what's important to know here and why they're being asked twice is that they're indicating that it was included in their income, but they're also breaking it down and sharing what types of income they received. So if they received these types of income, that amount will actually be deducted when determining their total income, so it won't count against them and that they will qualify for more student aid. Next slide. So the questions here about student untaxed income cover some of the less common types of untaxed income that the student may have received, including child support payments. So it's really important to note here that foster youth students who are participating in extended foster care do not have to report their AB 12 payments on the FAFSA. So this includes youth who are in extended foster care who are also receiving the infant supplement. That does not have to be included. They also do not have to report any CalWORKs payments, untaxed Social Security benefits, supplemental security income, or any economic impact payments or stimulus checks that they received due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That also includes any sort of emergency grants that they may have received from their campus as part of COVID-19 relief. If they have questions about any of the funding that they received from their school, they should contact their financial aid office for assistance. We just really want to make sure that students are aware of what this section on untaxed income refers to so that they don't incorrectly list those resources as income on their application. So on the next slide, there's a question that gives the student the option to skip questions about their assets. We encourage students to click yes. Otherwise, they will be asked about how much money they currently have in their checkings and savings accounts and the value of any investments that they might have. It's important to remind students that there's no penalty for skipping these questions because they're optional and won't affect whether or not their application is considered complete. I want to note too that this question shows as optional for some students. So if their income that they provided earlier is over a certain threshold, they will be asked to provide information about their current assets and they will not be provided the option to skip the questions. So if it shows as optional and they get the option to select yes or no about skipping the questions, we strongly encourage them to skip them. So the other important thing to note is that we know that the pandemic has posed a lot of challenges and students may have received unemployment benefits or they may have had significant changes to their income since they filed their 2020 tax return. If they've experienced either of these circumstances, we recommend that students contact the financial aid office at the school that they plan to attend and inform them that they received unemployment benefits or that their income has decreased. The financial aid office may be able to adjust their income on the FAFSA or the CADA to ensure that they qualify for the maximum amount of financial aid possible. Um, so in the next section, I am going to cover the second option for students that did not yet file a tax return, but are indicating that they will file their 2020 tax return. In reality, very few people will actually need to select this option because it means that they missed the deadline to file their 2020 taxes. So after they select will file from that initial drop-down menu, a warning message will appear confirming that they did indeed miss the deadline to file their 2020 income tax return, but they are planning to do so. So they will need to click OK to confirm that they read the message and that they selected the right answer choice. It's also really important to note that once they file their taxes and their return has been processed by the IRS, they will need to go back into their FAFSA application to make corrections and change their status from will file to already completed. So on the next slide, after they hit next, they will be taken to a screen to estimate what they think their gross income was in 2020. So remember, gross income refers to their total income before any deductions or taxes were taken out. So to estimate what they think their gross income was in 2020, they can either use their 2019 tax returns if they think their income might be similar. If not, there is a tool embedded within the FAFSA where they can use it. It's called the income estimator tool. It'll ask them a couple questions about what they think they earned, and then they can use that number. So after they answer this question, they'll be prompted to answer the same series of financial information questions as tax filers, but based on estimates. So again, this information will have to be updated once they actually file their 2020 tax return. So the next option I'm going to cover is the third and last option that students can select from that drop down about their tax return and their filing status. And so here they can select not going to file. So this is likely the most common scenario for our students who are high school seniors or those who didn't work at all or enough in 2020 to be required to file taxes. So next slide, please. The threshold to file a 2020 income tax return is $12,400, meaning that a person who was single, under 65 years old, and earned less than $12,400 in 2020 did not legally need to file taxes. Again, this is probably the most likely scenario for our high school seniors. So on the left, you will see directions on how to obtain what's called an IRS verification of non-filing form. And I just want to spend a moment explaining what this is and why it's important. So every year, every year the Department of Education sets out to verify the eligibility of about 30% of all federal aid applicants. So if a student who did not need to file a tax return because they did not meet that income threshold is flagged for verification, they will be asked to produce what is called an IRS verification of non-filing form to verify that they did not file taxes. The verification of non-filing is not an indication that the student is not required to file a return. It just verifies that they did not file one. The form can be requested from the IRS online or via mail. So students will be informed if they need to submit a verification of non-filing via their student aid report on the FAFSA or from the institution, their institution, which will contact them via personal email, college email, or their student portal. So if a student is flagged to provide this verification, their financial aid will not be processed and awarded until the necessary paperwork is completed and submitted. This process can be complicated, it can be very confusing, and the student may need support to produce the required documentation. We have a link on our website that you can see on the screen that has more instructions on how to request that verification of non-filing. All right, so from here, they would select not going to file and hit continue. So on the next screen, even if the student did not make enough money to file taxes, they're still going to be asked to report any income that they received or earned in 2020 from working. So this question, they can poll from their W-2s or their 1099s. It's pretty straightforward. If they did not earn any income from working, they can simply enter 0. It's just important to note that this question cannot be left blank. On the next slide, they'll be asked to provide additional information, much like we covered in the section for students who already filed taxes. So I won't go too much into this, but if they received any funding from a cooperative education program, or if they had any funding from federal work study, they will input that information here. Next slide. They will also be presented with the same questions about untaxed income. And again, they do not have to report their AB-12 benefits, their CalWorks, their supplemental security income, any untaxed Social Security benefits, or COVID-19 stimulus payments. The same rules apply that we discussed in the section for those who already filed their 2020 tax return, so I won't go into too much detail. But again, if they have any questions about the COVID relief funding that they received from their school, they should reach out to their financial aid office for assistance. Next slide. Lastly, like in the series of questions for those who have already filed their taxes, they may be given the option to skip questions about their assets. So here we encourage them to select yes. And like I mentioned, if their income is over a certain threshold, they will be asked to provide information about their current assets, though this is unlikely considering that they did not need to file a tax return and did not reach that $12,400 threshold. So on the next slide, I wanted to just point out a few key differences about the student financial sections on the CADA. So firstly, and very importantly to note, is that there is no IRS data retrieval tool for the CADA. So students will need to have their tax transcripts, any 1099s or W-2s readily available to input the information manually. If the student selects already filed or will file, they will be asked the same questions. So there's no differences in the questions here on the CADA between those two options. And if they select that they're not going to file, they will not be asked any additional questions. Other important difference to note about the CADA, so if regardless if the student selected already filed or will file, they will be asked about their current assets. So they don't have the option to skip those asset questions. All right, next slide, please. So this is the exciting part. We're at that step where we get to sign and submit. So this section is first going to ask the student if they are a preparer. This is a very, very rare scenario, and the answer here is generally no. So even if you are an adult supporter sitting next to them and helping them to complete the application, you are actually not considered a preparer. Next slide. So after they answer that question, the next screen will show a summary of all of the questions that they filled out on the FAFSA. They can select expand all to have a very detailed view of their whole application. The student at this point should consider printing out a copy of this page and reviewing the printout before submitting, because applicants may be less likely to notice any issues or errors when reading the application on the screen. Once they've confirmed that everything they answered is accurate and correct, they can click continue to go on to the next page. At this point, the FAFSA still needs to be signed and submitted. We're not done yet. So there's a series of sort of steps that happen in this section, and sometimes that can get a little bit confusing. So on the next screen, they will see an agreement of terms that they need to indicate that they agree to before that they can proceed. So once they select agree, you see that little checkbox there at the bottom, they can select sign and submit the FAFSA form. Next slide, please. So if they are not logged into the application with an FSA ID, they will be shown this signature option page. If this happens, we recommend that they create an FSA ID and sign the FAFSA form electronically. They can just click that link right there, right below the student's FSA ID field that says create an FSA ID, and they will be taken through the process to create an FSA ID that Jessica covered earlier on. If they are already logged into the FAFSA using an FSA ID, this page will not appear. Instead, they will be directed to the congratulations page on the next slide. So once they hit sign and submit the FAFSA form, they will see a screen that says, congratulations, your FAFSA was successfully submitted to federal student aid. Woohoo! So ideally, students will print and save this page for their records. If not, a copy will also be sent to them via email, and they'll want to make sure to save that. It can take about 3 to 5 days for the FAFSA to be processed. So if they need to make any changes to their contact information, if they want to add or change the schools that they selected, or if they want to update their income tax return information, they will have to wait until they receive their student aid report. And that can also take a few days to a few weeks, depending on just the volume of FAFSAs being submitted at that time. Also, to note on the top of the screen, they will see their confirmation number as well as their data release number, or DRN. So this is important for them to save as well should they need to make any changes to the application or if there were any errors. The next slide shows what the confirmation page looks like for the CADA. So it provides the student's California Dream ID number and the date that the CADA was submitted. Again, they should save or print a copy of this confirmation page for the records, since it also identifies actions that they're going to have to take to ensure that their eligibility can be determined. It's also really important to note that males are no longer required to register for the selective service in order to qualify for state financial aid. However, this is a very new law. And so the student might see a comment code on their confirmation page that indicates that they need to register for the selective service. We reached out to CSAC to confirm, and they are working to update this. So at this point, students can disregard this notice and no other further action is required on their part. So that this may appear, but again, they're no longer registered or required to register for selective service, and they can just disregard this notice. All right. So now we're going to talk about all of the fun stuff that needs to happen after the FAFSA or CADA is filed. And just as a reminder, Jessica mentioned completing the FAFSA and the CADA is just the first step. So after the application is processed, they'll want to log back in to make sure there weren't any errors. Next slide, please. So if everything went well, they'll see a screen like this that shows that their application status is listed as processed successfully. If there was an error and the application was not processed successfully, it will indicate so here, and it might also give some details about what needs to be fixed. Under the section labeled, you may take the following additional actions. The student has several choices. From here, they can make a correction by choosing Edit FAFSA Form. They can also select View Student Aid Report. In either instance, they will be taken to a page that asks them for their FSA ID, username, and password. If they need to make any corrections to their application, make sure that they have that save key handy, the save key that they created when they first started the application. So to Jessica's earlier points, it's really, really important that the student writes down all of these usernames and passwords and save codes in case they need to go back in and make changes. So on the next slide, this shows what the screen looks like if they click the option to view the student aid report, or the SAR for short. It may take a few days or weeks to receive the SAR, like we mentioned. The SAR, or it's actually called the CalSAR on the CADA, summarizes the information provided. It also includes their data release number and their expected family contribution. In the example on the screen, the student's expected family contribution is 0, which means that the student will likely qualify for the maximum amount of financial aid. Just as an important note, the student aid report is not the student's official financial aid award letter. It really just provides an estimate of what they may be eligible to receive. It's also, the student aid report will also include information if the student has been selected for additional verification. And it also show how many years the student can receive financial aid, or how many years they have left to receive financial aid, because there is a 6-year cap. Again, at least 30% of all students will be flagged for verification. So it's important that they respond to any requests for further documentation. And here at the top of the page, there is an option to print SAR if the student would like to have a printed copy. All right, there is one more very important additional step for CADA applicants that they must complete before they can receive aid. So they must sign what is called a non-resident exemption request, also known as an AB 540 affidavit. So this form states that they meet all of the requirements to qualify for a non-resident exemption under AB 540. And if they're undocumented, that they are in the process of legalizing their immigration status or will do so as soon as they are eligible to. So a student should get the affidavit from the Office of Admission at the college that they plan to attend, and they should complete the form upon accepting the offer to that college or at least one semester or quarter before they are scheduled to start classes. This is important because it takes some time to process this, and we want to make sure that they can receive aid in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned before, filling out the FAFSA CADA is just one step in terms of maximizing financial aid for foster youth. The next form of aid that we're going to talk more about is the Chafee grant. Next slide. So the Chafee grant has a maximum annual award amount of $5,000 that eligible students can receive up until the age of 26. Like most other forms of financial aid, the amount awarded is based on the student's unmet financial need, and whether the student is attending a program full or part-time. The funds can be used to cover all sorts of expenses. So tuition and fees, books, supplies, housing, transportation, even childcare. And the grant can be used for career and technical education, as well as 2-year or 4-year degree programs. The Chafee Grant Award is also portable. And this is really important because it means that students can use it at both in-state and out-of-state institutions, depending on where they're planning to attend school. One thing that we often get asked is if a student is in KinGap, if they're in legal guardianship, or if they were adopted, are they still eligible to receive the Chafee Grant? And the answer is that they are only eligible if they were a dependent or ward of the court living in foster care for at least 1 day between the ages of 16 and 18. And then lastly, undocumented foster youth who meet all other criteria are also eligible to receive the Chafee Grant. So if they've completed the CADA, they're also eligible for the Chafee Grant if they were in foster care between the ages of 16 to 18. All right, next slide. So unlike the FAFSA and the CADA, the Chafee Grant application only needs to be completed once as opposed to every year. Students can apply at the website listed on the screen. Also of importance, the Chafee Grant does not have the same March 2nd priority deadline as the FAFSA, but students should still apply as soon as possible since funding is limited. In fact, we recommend that students complete the application right after they submit the FAFSA or CADA. It's a very quick application. And if they don't receive funding for this academic school year, they will be placed on a wait list for future academic school years, and they do not need to apply again. The Chafee application, it asks for the student's planned school of attendance. And if the student doesn't see their school listed, they can contact the California Student Aid Commission, CSAC for short. And this is something that we see happen more frequently for students who are planning on attending a college or university that's out of state, as most of the out of state campuses are just not listed on the application. However, like I mentioned, the Chafee Grant can be used out of state at eligible institutions. So they just need to contact CSAC and let them know that the school that they plan to attend is not listed, and CSAC will help them. When a student completes the Chafee, if they're not yet sure where they plan to attend school, we just encourage them to pick a school. So even if they aren't 100% sure that it's the school that they will ultimately attend, they can update that information later on through the Web Grants for Students platform, which I'm going to talk about next. So after the FAFSA, after the CADA, after the Chafee Grant, it's really vitally important that students create a Web Grants account. And so for those who are unfamiliar, Web Grants is a platform managed by CSAC where students can view the status of their FAFSA, their CADA, and their Chafee applications. And so the other important thing to note, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, is that Web Grants can also be used to manage their Cal Grant. So next slide, please, Jessica. So students who complete the FAFSA are automatically considered for a Cal Grant, which is a form of state-funded financial aid. To qualify for this aid, students must be California residents or eligible immigrant students. They must also meet income eligibility and be enrolled at least half-time in a qualified program. If they are enrolling in a 4-year or 2-year program other than a CTE program, they must also have a 2.0 cumulative high school GPA. It's incredibly important to note that, and emphasize that students periodically check their web grants account to make sure that their high school submits their GPA. If their GPA is not submitted and matched with their FAFSA or CADA application, they will not qualify for the Cal Grant. So again, we encourage them to create that web grants account and make sure that there's no verification flags and that their GPA was submitted by their high school. And this is, historically, I will mention too that only 10% of foster youth received a Cal Grant in the past. So it's really important to help them complete the FAFSA and CADA, ensure that their GPA was successfully submitted, since they could be eligible to receive up to $6,000 in Cal Grant funding. So this is a lot of money, and it can really help them pursue their post-secondary goals. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of the nuances about the Cal Grant entitlement for foster youth. So as of this year, all community college students can receive a Cal Grant regardless of their age or how long ago they completed high school. So that's one thing that has changed that now impacts all community college students. Most students that are attending a 4-year university must apply for a Cal Grant within 1 year of high school graduation. However, back in 2018, the governor approved changes to the Cal Grant that expanded eligibility criteria for foster youth. So foster youth who are attending a 4-year university now have until the age of 26 to apply, and they can receive the Cal Grant for 8 years instead of 4. For purposes of the Cal Grant, a foster youth is defined as someone who was in care at least 1 day after the age of 13, which is similar to the FAFSA criteria that Jessica discussed earlier. The other form of aid that I want to talk about on the next slide is a brand new grant opportunity for students who completed the CADA and qualify for a Cal Grant B award. Jessica, can you please forward the slide? Thank you. So like I mentioned, this new California DREAM Act Service Incentive Grant Program, they call it DSIG for short, is an opportunity for students who complete the CADA and qualify for a Cal Grant B award, which typically means that they're low income. So this new grant program offers up to $3,000 per academic year for students who complete a certain number of volunteer work hours each semester or quarter. The grant is renewable for up to 8 semesters or 12 quarters, but the student must apply annually to participate, and they must also complete any necessary verification for their Cal Grant B award. The award is only available for 2,500 students. So it's important that interested students apply as soon as possible. The applications opened on July 1st, and they're accepting them on a rolling basis until all of the awards are exhausted. You can see the link on the screen and visit that link for more information about the grant program and also how to apply if you have any students who are interested. On the next slide, I want to talk just a little bit about what students can do and what they should be reviewing in web grants. And just to note that students will need to wait to actually create their web grants account until after their FAFSA or their CADA application has been processed. Like I mentioned before, it can take 1 to 2 weeks for the FAFSA to process and then link to the web grant system. So should they encounter any issues when creating a web grants account, we encourage them to reach out directly to CSAC for assistance. We have their telephone number and their email here listed on the screen. On the next slide, one of the very, very first things that we recommend that they do once they create a web grants account is to just confirm their contact information and make sure that this information is accurate and up to date, because this is the information that CSAC will use to contact the student. On the next slide, so once the student is in Web Grants for Students and has created a login and logs into the system, they can check the status of their financial aid awards. There are 3 possible statuses for their awards, and so if their award status is pending, they can click the button that says to do to determine their next steps. I'm going to show an example of what that looks like next. But if for any reason, if the award status shows as not awarded, they can click reason to learn more. And at this point, they should consult with the financial aid office or CSAC if they believe there was an error. So here is what a pending Chafee Grant award would look like in Web Grants for Students. And this is something that we come across when there are issues verifying the student's status as a foster youth. So due to JBay's legislative victory with Senate Bill 12, foster youth are no longer required to produce a letter of dependency to verify their status as a dependent or ward of the court for purposes of financial aid. Instead, the California Department of Social Services and the California Student Aid Commission do a monthly data share. If for some reason they are unable to verify the student's status, the student may see a prompt in Web Grants telling them to complete a foster care eligibility certification form. And this form just asks them for additional information that CDSS and CSAC need to complete the student's foster care verification. And there's just a few questions on there. It's pretty straightforward. It will ask them the county where they were in foster care and things of that nature. The other thing to note too, this data match between the California Department of Social Services and the California Student Aid Commission is on a monthly basis, and it can take up to 6 weeks for it to be reflected in the application status screen. So students should be advised that it may take time to show as complete before they start worrying that it's not finished or taking any sort of further action. One other thing I will note too, that although this process has been somewhat automated and there's this data match between CDSS and CSAC, it really still is best practice to help youth get a copy of their letter of dependency, because there could be instances where they need to produce that letter of dependency to qualify for other on-campus foster youth support programs or other scholarship opportunities. So again, it's a really vital document, and we do encourage them to get a copy of it and keep that in their records. Next slide, please. So in addition to checking their award status in Web Grants, students should make sure that they have no other pending items or forms that need to be completed. This is sort of a to-do checklist that they can look through of all the things that they should cover in Web Grants and make sure that they check on. The other real important one is that they should make sure to update their school of attendance in Web Grants once they decide where they will be enrolling. As I mentioned before, they can also use Web Grants to verify that their high school submitted their GPA. If they don't see their GPA reflected, they should contact their high school counselor, or they can reach out to CSAC for assistance. If the student is a high school senior, they will also need to enter their high school graduation date. The field to input their graduation date will become available on the first day of the month in which they expect to graduate. So if they are graduating in May or June, it'll become available on May 1st or June 1st, and they need to go back in and update it. So the other thing I wanted to talk about that is so important for our foster youth students is satisfactory academic progress. We spent a lot of time today talking about completing the FAFSA and the CADA, as well as the Chafee Grant application, so that students can maximize their financial aid, but it's equally as important that foster youth and their adult supporters are knowledgeable about the requirements that students must meet in order to maintain their financial aid. So that being said, I want to talk a little bit about satisfactory academic progress, or SAP for short. So each post-secondary institution that receives federal aid is required to have SAP standards that students must meet in order to maintain their financial aid. So typically, this means that students must maintain a cumulative 2.0 GPA. They must pass at least 67% of their classes, and they also must work towards completing their program in a reasonable time frame. If the student does not make SAP for 2 consecutive academic terms, they become disqualified from receiving financial aid unless they are able to successfully file an appeal with their financial aid office to have it reinstated. And this is really important because research conducted by JBay found that nearly 1 in 3 foster youth do not make SAP within their first 2 terms in a post-secondary program at the community college level. And this puts their financial aid in jeopardy. So on the next slide, we have some helpful tips about how to educate students about SAP, just making sure that they're aware of the SAP standards, and then ways to help them maintain their financial aid. We really strongly encourage adult supporters to talk to students about their institution's SAP standards and then connect them with an academic counselor as soon as possible to ensure that they're registering for the right classes. We also encourage them to reach out to any counselors before dropping or withdrawing from classes. If a student does not make SAP for those first 2 consecutive terms and they need to file an appeal to have their aid reinstated, the youth is going to need help with this appeals process. They'll have to file an appeal form. They also might have to submit some documentation, and it can be challenging to navigate. So we want to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. And then certainly last but not least, just making sure that youth are connected to resources early on. We want to be as proactive as possible and not reactive. This also means that if a student is sort of in, you're seeing warning signs that maybe they're struggling, maybe, they need some additional support. Let's jump in and get things, get them connected to resources and services before grades are posted and they don't meet those SAP standards. All right, so next slide. We've made it to the end. So we have just a couple important reminders here on the screen that we'll close with. A lot of these we've already mentioned, so I won't spend too much time here, but again, just making sure that students routinely check their email and their student portals to see if there's any verification flags or any documentation that they need to submit to have their financial aid processed. Also just making sure that they update all of their accounts when they get a new email address, mailing address, phone number, etc. And also that they research other scholarship and campus support programs for foster youth. I'll talk a little bit more about that in our resources section next. And then last but not least, making sure that they reapply for the FAFSA and CADA every year. Like we mentioned, the FAFSA CADA has to be submitted every year. The Chafee grant application does not. All right, so on the next slide, I'm just going to quickly go through some resources. The first resource on here is just for help completing the FAFSA application. So there's a live built-in help into the FAFSA on the web, so you can access that and even chat on the FAFSA application website. The U.S. Department of Education also has a toll-free hotline. You can see the numbers here on the screen. If the student has any issues with their FSA ID, there's a separate number that they should contact that you can see here listed. And then last but not least, there's a contact page on the U.S. Department of Education's website where they can find more information on who to reach should they have more specific questions. On the next slide, if the student has questions with the CADA application also has live built-in help. All they have to do is turn on auto hint, so that's available to them. They can also contact the Student Aid Commission, so the numbers and the email address is listed on the screen. There's also additional information on how to complete the application through CSAC's Cash for College website. So that's here listed on the screen. And then if they need help getting an IRS tax return transcript, we have the phone number. Last but not least, I want to talk about California College Pathways. This is an amazing website. They can go on here and click Find Campus Supports to locate the specific foster youth programs at the school that they want to attend, if it is a community college, CSU, or UC here in California. So it'll give them an actual name of a person and their contact information that they can reach out to if they have questions about the FAFSA, or if they want to know about what other resources and supports are available to them at that campus. So this is a great resource. We highly recommend sharing that address, that web address with foster youth students. And then on the next slide, we have a link or information about the the different types of guidance that are on our website. We've shared this link in the chat throughout today's webinar. So you can check that out to get our financial aid guide for California foster youth. You can also download the visual guide, which has screenshots of every question on the FAFSA and CADA. So those are available. We have some Spanish versions coming soon. This is also where we will be posting the webinar recording from today. So if you want to come back and check that out, it will be linked there. And then the last slide we have here is the FAFSA demo site. So if you're going to be working with a lot of students on completing the FAFSA, you can go on to the demo site and just test it out. Do like a pretend application and see kind of how it looks, feels, and the questions that you get prompted to answer. With that being said, I think we only have about a minute left.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Sarah, for all that great information. And I just want to thank Elizabeth and Debbie for fielding all the questions in the Q&A, all 158 of them. I saw there was a lot of folks who were interested in getting a copy of the question and answers from today's webinar. So just so everyone knows, we will be sending the recording from the webinar today, the slides, and the question and answer as well. So all that will be coming your way in our inbox. And we are at time, so just wanted to thank all of you so much for attending today's webinar and all the work you're doing to support our young people in accessing financial aid. We really appreciate your time and happy financial aid season. Take care, everybody.